Everybody here. Thanks for coming. My name is Alice Maggio. I'm a board member of the Schumacher Center for New Economics, and I'm going to be facilitating the conversation today. I'll start with a little framing, and then we'll meet our panelists for the day. So the Schumacher Center for New Economics was founded in 1980 and works to envision the elements of a just and regenerative global economy, undertaking to apply these elements in our home region of the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, and then developing the educational programs to share the results broadly and encourage replication. 2023 marks the 50th anniversary of E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful. The Schumacher Center sees this anniversary as an opportunity to advance solutions that build on Schumacher's vision. Central to the 2023 celebrations are this monthly series convening new economic thinkers, builders, and activists to share their latest insights and advance common paths forward. 2023's Schumacher Conversations bring together changemakers from a range of fields whose work today is actively shaping a small is beautiful future. Focused around key themes and fields of activism, each online conversation will chart actionable pathways toward a just, regenerative planet. Today's theme is Rethinking Ownership and Work, Shared Responsibility and Reward. This theme comes out of Small is Beautiful. At the end of Small is Beautiful, the book concludes not only on the question of scale, but rather on the issue of ownership, lamenting the polarizing dichotomy of public versus private ownership in modern industrial society. Schumacher assures the reader that reality, thank God, is more imaginative. The book's chapter explores alternative patterns of collective governance, ownership, and worker control as necessary for place-based, ecologically responsible, and human-scaled regeneration. To quote Schumacher, "In small-scale enterprise, private ownership is natural, fruitful, and just. In large-scale enterprise, private ownership is a fiction, enabling functionless owners to live parasitically on the labor of others, an irrational element which distorts all relationships within the enterprise." End quote. When enterprises are owned by the workers themselves, the surplus created by their industry may be more fully distributed to these individuals' families and to the larger community that nourishes and supports them. What's more, the cooperative model carries with it the potential to transform patterns of relationships, cultivating shared accountability and cooperative deliberation. Worker ownership of enterprise is therefore not only a means of redistributing wealth and power, but of repairing the alienation and lack of agency fostered by the old economic paradigm. Today, we have panelists who have firsthand experience with worker ownership and the movement to create more democratic workplaces. I'll introduce them now, and then we will hear opening remarks from each of them, followed by a conversation and questions and answers. So first, we have Julian McKinley. Julian is Democracy at Work Institute's co-executive director for partnerships and growth. His work is driven by storytelling and tangible solutions for a more equitable economy, including family financial security, regenerative economics, and employee ownership. While at Dowie, he has trained cooperative developers in the US and East Africa, helped lead New York City's Worker Cooperative Business Development Initiative, and developed strategies to better reach the growing ecosystem of worker cooperative developers. Our next panelist is John Abrams. John is a principal with Abrams and Angell, a consulting practice focused on triple bottom line business practices and worker co-op conversions. He is a co-founder and president emeritus of South Mountain Company, an employee-owned integrated architecture, building, and solar energy company. His book, Companies We Keep, Employee Ownership and the Business of Community and Place, was published in 2008. Our third panelist is Beth Spong. Beth brings a lifetime of entrepreneurship, mission-driven consulting, and nonprofit leadership to Dean's Beans, a 30-year-old fair trade coffee company in Orange, Mass. As of this year, the business is transitioning into a worker-owned cooperative with Beth as the CEO. Welcome to our panelists. I'm so glad to have you here. And we are going to jump right into each of your opening remarks, and then we'll have some more conversation. So I'll turn it over to you, Julian.
Thanks, Alice. Hi, everyone. I'm Julian McKinley, as Alice mentioned. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. Just really quickly about Democracy at Work Institute. So we're a national think and do tank that works to expand worker ownership for workers who are locked out of good jobs and business ownership opportunities. We do this work through research and business innovation, education, and advocacy, and we're also founded by the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel today, especially alongside Beth and John, and particularly to discuss ownership in the context of Small is Beautiful, which has been an inspiration for worker owners, allies, and others in pursuit of a more equitable economy for decades now. And Schumacher's thoughts on ownership are quite clear. And I'm going to share a quote as well. So I'm glad, Alice, that we didn't have the same exact quote. But in reflecting on the extractive nature of business, Schumacher says that high profits are either fortuitous or they are the achievement not of the owner, but of the whole organization, that they should be shared with all members of the organization. And therefore, it is unjust and socially disruptive if they are appropriated by the owner alone. Additionally, Schumacher wrote that there is need to allow all members of the organization some degree of genuine participation in management. And so these are really the defining characteristics of worker ownership. Right, businesses that are owned by the people who work in them, providing direct benefit from the business success that they have helped create, and having a say in how the business operates. Now, the importance of these features are as important today, if not more important, than they were when Small is Beautiful was first published. And I say more important simply because of the sheer scale of inequity that exists today. Wealth gaps are wider than they've ever been before. Worker wages have remained relatively stagnant, while large corporations have reported historic profits and extravagant CEO pay. I think we're all well familiar with this reality, as it's been well reported. But this is the social disruption that Schumacher alluded to in referencing the denial of fruits of labor to workers in order to benefit a single owner or a small set of shareholders, particularly external shareholders. And so worker ownership helps address many of these challenges. And that's why we've seen a large uptick in interest of the model over the past 10 to 15 years in particular. In economic downturns especially, worker cooperatives experience a boost in interest. Most recently, we saw this during the pandemic when it became clear that our economy is not designed to support the essential workers who make our local economies go, right? Workplace safety, worker pay, scheduling, these are all exposed as being overlooked by businesses and workers in many cases. And workers in many cases are saying that we need to have a say in our workplace experience. We should benefit from the business value that we create through our skills and labor. Now, increased union activity and increased worker ownership are both results of this. And there are several industries in particular in which we've seen significant movement. I want to note here as a sidebar, while I'm going to talk a little bit about industry, there isn't a particular industry in which worker cooperatives are best suited for. I get that question regularly, and the answer is that worker co-ops experience success across industries. Schumacher did mention that there are certain sizes of businesses that would be best for profit sharing, but worker co-ops do experience success across industries. And there are some industries where we're seeing increased popularity. I think probably the best known cooperative in the U.S. is Arizmendi, their bakeries in the Bay Area. So service industries are always popular with worker co-ops. We're seeing movement with taxi co-ops as well, which many of the newer ones employ a hybrid platform to worker co-op model, and they're growing in New York and California and Colorado. And they're being driven by the disruption left by Uber and Lyft. And they're also inspired by the likes of Union Cab of Madison Cooperative, which I think many folks are familiar with. There's also been a growing number of white-collar businesses that have become cooperatives, sometimes driven by the values of collaboration they hold and a desire to have those values reflected in their workplace. These include businesses like Big Duck, which I'm based in New York City. So in Brooklyn, we have a design firm, Big Duck. They've been around for a while. They converted to worker ownership over the past few years. And of course, Defector Media, which is a news website that was launched by former Deadspin workers. And so, in addition to that, we're seeing a larger focus with respect to the challenges in local economies that we're seeing on home care workers, childcare workers, and contingent workers. And these workers all operate in fields with high stress, high turnover, inconsistent scheduling, maybe even in some cases may experience some wage theft. But worker ownership provides protections for these workers. And we're seeing a natural response to these conditions in our economy where workers are striving to improve their job quality and build pathways towards wealth building. Along those lines, the largest worker co-op in the nation I want to note is Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is in the Bronx, New York. They have over 1,000 workers, and a hallmark of their model is their really high retention rate and a high turnover industry and the professional development that they provide to their cooperative members. And so at Dowie, we don't just promote worker ownership for the sake of worker ownership, but we work with partners across the US to use worker cooperatives as a tool for equitable economic development. And I'm lucky today to sit here with Beth and John because they are bringing two stories of two tremendous businesses that have transitioned to employee ownership. And from an economic development standpoint, worker ownership transitions are increasingly being used within the toolbox of development on the local level, mostly because they preserve jobs, they root wealth in the local economy, they build on a legacy of success that continue providing critical services in their community, and in many cases, they produce stronger businesses as well. And so ownership transitions, where we're seeing a lot of interest, also provides us with a line of sight towards increasing the number of worker cooperatives across the U.S., creating pathways towards wealth building, and also opportunities for supportive policy across the United States. And so this is where I think we're also able to make another direct tie to Schumacher's work, and that's considering the importance of maintaining the thriving local economies, right? Over the past few years, we've seen the number of worker co-ops grow, worker co-ops and democratic workplaces, I should say, grow over 30%. They grew over 30% between 2019 and 2021. That's according to our research at Dowie, which we conduct with the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. And this growing interest is on the part of, yes, worker owners striving for better jobs, business owners who are considering succession, developers and support organizations, and government entities as well. We work with municipalities across the U.S. who are seeing long-standing businesses get priced out of their communities. They're anticipating that a retirement of baby boomers over the next decade is really going to provide an opportunity, as opposed to a loss, to save businesses. Baby boomers employ about 25 million people in the US, and they own about 2.3 million businesses. And so over half of the business closures in the US are typically the cause of, or the single largest cause of job loss. And millions of jobs are at risk of going away. And so workers are increasingly looking to better their working conditions, and receive pay that's reflective of the value that they create. As we just in closing, as we think about the impact that Small is Beautiful has had on everyone searching for a new economy, for a better economy, in particular those searching for ways to use worker co-ops, it's important for us to use it as a basis for understanding how we can escape the failures of the current system and really build those stronger jobs and more vibrant local economies that we want to see.
Thank you, Julian. Thanks for kicking us off. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Alice. Well, I am really honored to be here today with my colleagues and at this center that I've admired and engaged with for decades. And I'm always been a big fan of Julian's organization and the incredible work that they've done. And those of you out there, thank you all for joining us today. Small is Beautiful anticipated in 1973 the problems of a global economy that didn't even exist yet. Schumacher recommended local control over large corporate entities and celebrated the use of appropriate technology, a term that's largely been replaced today by localization. His book influenced a generation of social entrepreneurs who operate on the principle that there's such a thing as enough and emphasize quality over quantity and equity over exclusivity. Now, when I first read it in 74, it fully resonated with the back to the land practices we had explored in prior years, but I had no idea then how influential it would become in the business I was just beginning to build. Schumacher named and framed something that many of us were practicing. As South Mountain Company established itself, we embraced localization and we dismissed the bigger is better imperative, which author and environmental advocate Ed Abbey once called the ideology of the cancer cell. I recently reread the book, and as you read, it's so easy to imagine that our propensity to inflict lasting harm on our planet and allow wealth supremacy to reign would have been so heartbreaking, but not surprising to Schumacher if he were here today. On the other hand, he would have been so inspired and uplifted by the ascendance of counterforces like regenerative agriculture, distributed renewable energy, employee ownership, fair trade, prioritizing Main Street over Wall Street, all of these things that he would have loved that the internet allows us to think globally and act locally. He would have admired the thousands of B Corps which are using business as a force for good. But how can these movements alter the chemistry of our economic system? I'm going to concentrate my answer on small business and talk a little bit about the businesses that Julian was talking about. Today, my number is nearly 3 million US businesses with employees whose founders are over 55. The silver tsunami that's taking place now is estimated to result in $10 trillion in assets changing hands in small businesses. Now, many business owners want to keep their mission-driven organizations vital, healthy, independent, beyond their personal leadership. And at the same time, many employees, as well as younger entrepreneurs, are hungry for work that's honest, that's meaningful, that's humane, that's inclusive. Now, some of these aging founders will pass their businesses on to family members. Others will unceremoniously close the doors. But many of these companies have sufficient value that they might be sold to strategic buyers, to larger companies, and to private equity. They may be absorbed, bundled, relocated, squeezed, carved up, sold for parts. Their roles as the ballast of communities may end as management without soul takes over. David Korten, in his book, The Great Turning, says, to achieve the democracy which is central to our national self-image, we must first acknowledge that we've never had it. We're slowly making progress toward achieving liberty and justice for all only through the long and difficult struggles of the excluded. Now, a large segment of those who have been excluded, a group consisting of people of all colors, persuasions, and national origins, is the workers who produce our nation's goods and services, as Julian said, as Schumacher said. But what if those many millions of employees of these companies, those who have helped to build them and whose livelihoods depend on their stability, what if they could provide capital through their labor and through progressive lenders and assume ownership, democratically manage, and reap the rewards? That's my question. There may be no reason except a lack of information how to do it. So to maintain mission in small businesses and direct more wealth and agency to workers, business owners, their advisors, and their employees must understand and successfully accomplish 4 transitions that I identify, from sole proprietorships and partnerships to widely shared ownership, from original founder to next generation leadership, from hierarchical control to participatory democratic management, and from unprotected mission to perpetually preserved purpose. So I'll talk in a minute about the variety of designs that exist to help mission-driven companies make these 4 transitions, which I call successioning. But first, let's talk for a bit about work, which can become an expression of who we are and one of our most important moorings. I was fortunate to discover this early and quite by accident. Without intention or plan, I entered the world of business in my youth and found that it satisfied my longings for joy, for justice, and for impact, all 3. I was fortunate to experience for the last 50 years the kind of work that pulls you out of bed each morning like a powerful magnet. My colleagues and I, with little knowledge, but plenty of a naive enthusiasm, developed South Mountain Company into an emblematic worker co-op. This was not by purpose, it was pure dumb luck. I'm writing a book now called Founder to Future, New Strategies for Equity, Impact, and Succession that I hope will remove the luck part for others as more people come to know about this counter-revolution to the way most work is, which is rootless and heartless and exploitative and extractive. I supplement my writing by working with a variety of businesses to help them with worker co-op conversions and direct them to other resources when appropriate. Emerging new concepts of social enterprise recognize that small businesses can be living systems that work for all the right reasons: to make people's lives more meaningful and satisfying, to spread wealth more equitably, to treat the planet and each other better, and to protect mission and create legacy, making work that matters, reshaping tomorrow's workplace for the common good and individual fulfillment at once. Applying these alternative corporate design concepts may help the small business constellation, which includes nearly half of U.S. private sector employees, lead a new era of shared prosperity, social impact, and better lives on a hopefully healing planet. Designs like the Worker Cooperative, which has become an important silver tsunami succession entity of choice, the path that Dean Beth and her colleagues chose. Julian's Democracy at Work Institute has an essential role in the spread of worker co-ops. Meanwhile, thousands of employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, employ roughly 14 million people in this country. Some of these, only some, have democratic inclinations. But coming on strong is the Perpetual Purpose Trust, the PPT, a form of employee ownership trust, which is relatively unusual in the US, but widespread in Great Britain. Some of the current 40 in the US have high profiles like Patagonia, Zingerman's, and the Organically Grown Company, and they're drawing a tremendous amount of attention. But underlying this whole new era of purpose-driven business is the B Corp movement. More than 7,300 companies in 89 countries have undergone the rigorous process of certification to earn the recognition that they are truly honoring a triple bottom line that assigns equal weight to people, to planet, and to prosperity. B Lab, the nonprofit network driving this movement, says, we won't stop until all of business is a force for good. So that's the message, making business a force for good. And there's no reason to wait until the founder is ready to retire to begin these transitions. The earlier, the better. Ownership and leadership transitions are not necessarily linked, and often it's better if they're separated. South Mountain became a worker co-op when I was 38, in the prime of my work life. I would not retire and transition full leadership until 35 years later. And this is not only about aging founders, it's about every Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z business too, from those just out of the gate to the very mature. Each of these companies should be doing succession planning right now. Successioning is often considered to be well, not now, we'll get to that thing later, but early succession preparation has tremendous immediate benefits. Building leadership capacity and inclusive ownership and workplace culture boosts the business every day. So the founder to future message is supported by the differences and commonalities of two eras, the tumultuous era in which South Mountain began and Schumacher wrote, and today's polycrisis, mold-shattering times, which often make us feel like life is walking through a minefield. But our current situation is, at the same time, a vast virgin forest of opportunity. We've seen transformation happen many times in our history. One of those times was Schumacher's 60s and 70s. An astonishing number of the important aspects of our lives have changed dramatically in the last 50 years. And most got their big push from activists and counterculturists of those times. Women's and racial equality, LGBT rights, Native American sovereignty, holistic health, local and organic food, environmental awareness and justice, the renewable energy revolution, and the democratization of information, which is questionable. Less celebrated, but equally significant, is the business advancements which were led by the same activists and countercultural constituency. We didn't know about B Corps. We didn't know the term triple bottom line. We didn't know about any of these alternative structures, but we knew enough to know that we could make business a force for good. Now we have better tools, and the work is more urgent than ever. But transformation is possible. Transitioning to a just and sustainable, non-extractive economic system has become the fundamental long-term challenge of our times. 50 years ago, Fritz Schumacher gave us Buddhist economics and a scaffolding on which to build this world-changing work. I'm pretty sure this can be done. So thank you for the gift of your attention. I look forward to hearing from Beth and for the discussion to come with you.
Thank you, John. I love how all of this is just building on itself. And so I'm going to turn it over to Beth, who has her own experience with worker ownership that's very recent to share. Thanks. I'll turn it over to you, Beth. You're muted.
There we go. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon to be part of this conversation about thinking about democracy at work. And I am so appreciative of Dawi and Julian's brilliant work in this space, leading the way and providing frameworks and tools for businesses to use, and for John's legendary leadership in the worker-owned cooperative movement, and as one of the pioneers in that space. So I am the CEO of Dean's Beans Organic Coffee. And I'm assuming that if you're on this webinar, that you're here because you are either interested in retiring, or you're interested in doing something that builds a future foundation and for your company, or you're an employee who has interest in employee ownership opportunities, or you are committed to the just and regenerative economy that Schumacher wrote and taught about. And so let me tell you a little bit about Dean's Beans. As Alice said in the beginning, we are an organic fair trade coffee company that's 30 years old, founded in 1993 by Dean Sycon. That's hence the name Dean's Beans. And he actually founded the company on the small is beautiful principles. And he had read the book, he'd been moved and inspired by it. Today, we are a $7 million a year company, so we're a small company. We have 16 employees, 15 of whom are worker owners. And we roast about 700,000 pounds of coffee a year, which in the independent coffee roasting sphere makes us larger than 90% of the businesses in that space. So in our industry, we are on the toward the larger end, and we are still a small business. So Dean always thought through decisions about growth of the company based on environmental, social, and economic impact. Our purpose, the reason the company exists, is to create social, economic, and environmental justice. And we happen to sell coffee to do that. as a vehicle for that. Dean always recognized that our resources are finite. One of the major flaws that Schumacher wrote about in our understanding of economics was believing that the world is full of infinite resources. And so in Dean's awareness that resources are finite, how do we best use them? And continually grappled with the questions of scale, of humanity, of what the earth needs from us. Before founding the company, Dean was an environmental and indigenous rights attorney for more than a decade. And he set out to prove, as an experiment, that a for-profit business could create meaningful change through ethical business practices, rooted in respect for the earth, for the farmer, for our coworkers, and for consumers. And he thought, well, if this experiment doesn't work, we'll make it into a nonprofit. If it can't be for profit, we'll make it into a nonprofit. So he founded the company with the mission of using specialty coffee as a vehicle for positive change. And here we are today. Turns out, successful experiment. Yes, we are a profitable, consistently and continuously profitable company over the last 30 years. We have grown from operating in Dean's barn at his house to having 15,000 square feet of facility here in Orange, Massachusetts, which is in the western part of the state. And in terms of what Dean's commitment to small is beautiful and to the concept of enough, what that has looked like over the years is there was a time when we were selling coffee in Whole Foods stores across Massachusetts and southern New England. And Whole Foods came and said, we'd like you to be in stores all over the United States. And Dean thought about what would that actually mean to the company for us to increase in scale so dramatically, so rapidly, and how would that impact workers? How would it work for the facility that we have? And he said, no, thank you. And a number of years later, Trader Joe's came and said, we would like you to be the Trader Joe's coffee. So you'll be in a Trader Joe's can, but it'll be Dean's Beans coffee. And again, he thought about what is the cost? What's the opportunity cost here? What would there be a way to do this and honor the values and the character of the company? And he decided that he couldn't say yes to that, partly because large retailers are notoriously fickle. So we might be the coffee du jour for a few years, and then they might have change of heart. And so if he had completely expanded and scaled up the company, and then our largest customer said, thanks, but we're moving on, what impact would that then have on the company? So he said, no, thank you, because of the risks that he understood about that. And when it came time for him to consider retirement, he said no to selling the company to a large conglomerate that, as John aptly described, would likely want to buy the company's brand, but would have not honored our values and would have likely moved jobs away from the area, dismantled the company, and then carried the brand forward in a hollowed out entity. So over 100 years ago, Andrew Carnegie was asked, how much is enough? His response was, just a little bit more. And Dean's answer to the question, how much is enough, has been, our workers are well paid. They have great benefits. They have a good retirement plan. 100% of health insurance is paid. We pay the farmers, the coffee farmers, fairly for fair trade, organic, bird-friendly coffee. We partner in direct development with the coffee farming cooperatives and communities based on what the farmers tell us will improve their lives and the lives of their families. This is enough. And so we live in that understanding of what is enough. So just to talk briefly about what does that look like in terms of decisions and operations on a day-to-day basis in the company and also in the coffee lands. What are we doing as a company? I just mentioned the the good pay and benefits, and also profit sharing has been a part of that. We consider sustainability every single day. We have a commitment to putting people and the planet before profit, and we are a B Corp. In 2018, we became a benefit corporation, a B Corp, which, as John said, is making sure that our business is a force for good. We were already doing everything that a B Corp does, but we felt strongly that we needed to add our name to the list of companies who make a public and explicit commitment to that and join that movement. So we've been B Corps. Our beanery up here in orange is solar powered. Our packaging is compostable, and we really work hard to stay at the leading edge of environmentally friendly packaging. We buy and use energy efficient coffee roasters. We are always looking at how we can reduce, reuse, and recycle, how the byproducts of our coffee roasting can benefit the community, can benefit farmers, whether it's where the burlap bags go or the coffee chaff goes. And we are carbon zero company, which means we contribute more benefit to the environment than we take or use. And that has been our goal. So we're not just heading toward carbon neutral, which is offsetting our carbon emissions, but we are so active in preventing damage to the environment that we are in fact carbon zero. So in the coffee lands, by which I mean the global South, where people, often indigenous people and communities, grow the coffee that we buy. We pay more for coffee. We listen to the farmers about their lives, about their farms, about the needs of their families and communities. And then we invest in those coffee producing communities and the cooperatives. We partner directly with the farmers. What that looks like is we fund co-designed and developed education projects, literacy projects, maternal health projects, water projects, economic opportunity, youth development projects, youth forestry projects, reforestation projects. So deforestation is having a huge impact on the climate and on coffee producers around the world. So we work really hard to help offset the impacts by funding and supporting reforestation projects around the globe, having planted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of plants in coffee producing countries. So now, as of June 30th of this year, Dean has retired. The employees have purchased the company from Dean, and we are at the beginning of our journey as a worker-owned cooperative. And historically, the owning class has been the ruling class. And historically, and we see today, that wealth supremacy leads to inhumane wealth disparities. And so as we've been moving toward this transition with the support from the Cooperative Development Institute, CDI, and their amazing team and expertise, we as a group have affirmed the company's longstanding mission to use specialty coffee as a vehicle for positive change. We have created a vision that's aligned with that and clearly articulated our company's values. So now we own the company. We own its assets, its liabilities. We own its opportunities and its challenges. We own a share in its profits and perhaps one day of some losses. We own all of that. And that ownership invites us to learn the communication and decision-making skills that will allow us to live into our mission, vision, and values as we face the opportunities and challenges that we encounter over time. We get to hold ourselves accountable to our customers and the farmers that we work with for being a for-profit business that creates meaningful change through ethical business rooted in respect for the earth, the farmer, our coworkers, and the consumer. So now we have two hats, the 15 of us. We have employee hats and we have owner hats. And my understanding is that when things are going well, it's going to be really easy for us to wear our owner hats. And when things get challenging, it's going to be, or more complex, people might want to switch to their employee hat. And so we're going to experiment with how those roles, having both those key roles, integrates for the company. It's an exciting time, and we feel like we're riding the movement, the strength and the growing power of the worker ownership movement, and are so grateful to be here. It's wonderful to be able to share what we're doing and how our company operates, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you all for giving us such great background. And now we have just so much to talk about. I know that I have a bunch of questions that have come up for me, and I'm wondering if you all have themes or questions that have stuck out to you as you've been listening to your colleagues here, that you'd like to share. In a minute, so we'll do a little bit of kind of conversation based on those opening remarks, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. So audience members, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box to put them through, and we will be asking some of them. There's some in there already, so thank you. So why don't we start by having you all ask each other questions, things that have come up for you or that particularly struck you.
Thanks,
I have
Alice.
a question. Yeah, I have a question for Julian. As you're sort of, Dawi's kind of at the tip of the spear of this movement in some really important ways. What are you seeing as this becomes a more well-known leadership transition option, ownership option for businesses? What are some of the default, yeah, we could do that, but what are some of the reasons that people or business owners are saying, oh, no, I'm not sure that's for us? That what gets in the way of openness to considering it?
Sure, that's a great question, Beth. You know, one of the immediate hurdles that I'm sure you're familiar with, as far as businesses exploring employee ownership, is just the awareness factor. It is a foreign concept for a lot of business owners, and it's also contradictory to, I think, the way that most business owners were taught how they should run their business. Because of, like, I think if you're able to get over that first step, the first hurdle of, okay, here's this, what they think at the time is sort of like this novel idea, then, you know, people are able to really see, okay, how can I apply this to my business? Is this a reality? I think there's, you know, as you mentioned in your story, and thank you, Beth and John, for sharing your stories. They're incredibly inspiring. So I really appreciate everything you've shared today. But as you mentioned, you know, there's some work that goes along with the transition. You know, you mentioned the support that you're receiving from the Cooperative Development Institute, how it's more than just structuring a deal and selling the business to employees. I think that is also another element that really may scare off some business owners. But then when you're able to really communicate the benefit of what that long-term vision is, what, you know, how much stronger your organization or your company can be when you're able to, you know, provide training, understand how to do decision making, share information across your organization. If someone is able to really understand that benefit, that also can help them get over that initial hump.
You know, Julian, that rings so true. I've noticed that it's actually an infectious disease. It's catching when people experience other worker co-ops. So we have this organization called Building Energy Bottom Lines, which is a program of the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. And it started as 30 businesses in 3 groups, working with each other to help each other improve and refine the triple bottom line practices in our businesses. And now there are 60 companies, and this is all in the design, build, architecture, and building field. And of those 60 companies, when we first started, 2 of them were employee-owned. And the other day, we did a little survey, and I think it's 16 or 18 of the 60 companies now are either worker co-ops or in the process of transitioning, or about to be. And I have a feeling it's just going to sweep like fire through the whole organization. And that's what it feels like.
Awesome.
I like, Beth, I like how you went back to, what are some of the questions you get all the time? I think that maybe that's a good idea to go back to basics, and just, if one of you could just take a stab at just telling people in the audience, just what does worker ownership mean? Because I work in, I'm a co-op developer with the working world in New York City. And one of the questions I get all the time is just like, how does it work? How do you become an owner? Does it cost money? How do you leave being an owner? Those kinds of things. If somebody could just outline those very basic things.
Sure. As a baby, Bren, I have to not say that. As a brand new worker-owned cooperative, we really did actually this was a planned exit on Dean's part. And he was committed to staying in the company until the team was ready. So we worked with CDI, Cooperative Development Institute, on basically employee education, everything from opening the books so people understand our finances, where the money is, and to writing our bylaws. So it's a process where the employees actually learn about the basics and the responsibilities and the rights of ownership. The way it works is each owner has one share and gets one vote in the process. There is a cost for membership. It's a share. The price of a share is determined by the team. And then people have the option of paying that share price in whatever way they prefer. They can pay it upfront all at once. They can pay it over time. They can have a small amount of money withdrawn from every paycheck to go toward their share price. So because we didn't want, I think the minimum deduction, paycheck deduction for the share payment is $25 per paycheck, because we did not want to have the share price be a barrier to ownership. And now we're in the process of this afternoon at 4:30, we're having our third board meeting. And Dean has remained on our board and will be on our board as a guide and a source of wisdom and expertise for the first 3 years, which is awesome. And I think I'll hand it to somebody else now for next steps and things that I might be missing.
So one thing that comes up for me is, I guess the spectrum of like employee ownership. And so that's something that's important to consider. I think, Beth, you did a great job of describing what like the worker ownership experience is, particularly from a business that has gone from the conventional structure to the worker ownership structure. And so worker cooperatives are just one option along the spectrum. Of course, they're worker cooperatives. There are ESOPs, as John mentioned earlier, so employee stock ownership plans. There's also employee-owned trusts. And so there's lots of creativity there, I think, for people to consider what is the best fit for our business. And so, just getting back to what I said earlier at the top of our webinar here, which is we think about worker cooperatives as a tool. So like they serve a certain interest, or they meet a certain challenge, and they're a fit for certain businesses. That said, worker ownership isn't the right fit for every single business. Very large businesses, I think many of them would be better suited for an ESOP model, for example. But also an ESOP model, it doesn't mean that you're going to have participation in the workplace. And so it's up to the business to understand, what are the things that are really important to us here? Why do we exist? And what's the impact that we want to have either on our community, on our workers, or, as John said, thinking about that triple bottom line, our profits as well.
Great, thank you. I was thinking that, some of the things I noticed from the conversation were we kind of have there's lots of themes, but two of them that stand out to me are kind of like getting ready for a transition, and what does it take to get ready to make an ownership transition and or a leadership transition. So that's kind of a theme I think we could explore some more. And then another one is, and I think we haven't really gotten into this that much, but maybe just what is life like in a worker cooperative once that transition has been made, or once you start a cooperative, and what are some of the skills that it takes to succeed in a worker-owned business. So those are some of the things that interest me. I'm sure there's other themes that we could explore as well.
So,
John, this is all you, John.
oh, I don't know. But what you reminded me of, Alice, is that the question about what's it like. And one of the things I have found is that every business is so different, and the expression of this in different businesses is different. But one thing that's very common is that the culture of the business tends, as it becomes worker-owned, you have to make this separation. It's not like a worker co-op where everybody's an owner or many are owners. It's not like decisions get made by drawing straws. There's this very important distinction between what are policy decisions, and that's what the owners make, and what are management decisions, and that's what managers make. But one of the things at South Mountain, we created this path to ownership, and it starts the day you're employed. And actually, everybody has a little passbook, and it's your journey to ownership. And every experience possible to experience in that company over the years that you're preparing to become an employee owner, you experience. And people do this as cadres of people who have been hired in clusters. And it makes the company just comes alive. People see behind the workings, into the workings, become more engaged. Engagement in worker co-ops seems to be particularly complete. Like there becomes a culture of commitment and dedication, and I can't say that this is true of all worker co-ops, but I've experienced a lot of them, and it seems fundamentally different. There's a feeling of camaraderie that's stronger. And there are companies that are not worker co-ops that have that, but it really is characterized by worker co-ops.
I love the creativity of the past, like the pathway passbook. And I feel like that's something that cooperatives have, where it's just this added dimension. It's definitely an added dimension that you have to pay attention to and put time into and think about. But it's also this other dimension where you can apply your creativity, so that you have to be creative to be a successful business owner, but you also have this kind of ownership angle that you can explore, which makes it exciting.
It's really interesting. The path to ownership it's very cool, because this woman, Abby, young woman at South Mountain, manages it, and everybody has their passbook. It's really a passport. And each time you have one of these experiences, you get it signed. And then when the whole passbook is full, then you're ready to be an owner, and then you can pay your money, sign the papers, and there's something very organic about it.
And part of what's extraordinary is that South Mountain, having been a worker-owned cooperative for so many years now, has developed some really beautiful processes and systems and tools for decision-making, for what does democracy in our workplace look like? What is the path to ownership? And they're very generous with their resources, which you can find on the South Mountain website.
Yeah, but you have to remember.
So thank you for that.
You have to remember, Beth, that we limped along for so many years. Some of these things took so many years to develop, and we would stumble upon things and going, why didn't we think of that 20 years ago, So it takes time.
Well, I'm glad that you were one of the companies that invented the wheel and that we just have to learn how to drive.
Do you have any other questions for each other that came up during the opening remarks?
So John, you just mentioned longevity, and I'm just sitting here thinking about, you've been around for a long time now, or South Mountain has been around for a long time, and Beth also mentioned Dean's Bean's ability over time to, basically say no to these very large deals because in consideration of like what is, the right amount of growth, what is enough. So for both of you, how do you think about how to maintain or to continue to maintain the values that contributed to your business's success to date? I think, John, I think looking back over the past few decades, and Beth, looking forward, how do you continue to do that?
I would say, Julian, that for South Mountain, it has always been very central. We've spent a lot of time doing strategic planning and also imagining our place in the community, like deciding what kind of commitments we can make to make our community a better community. And that evolved into guiding principles that guide our work. And in the same way that Dean said no to Trader Joe's, we have spent a tremendous amount of time saying no because work that comes our way does not fit our mission. So I think having a clear mission and deciding that this is who we're going to be, otherwise you get caught in just responding to demand and into the growth cycle, and there you go. So that helps also with retention because people are doing work that has meaning to them and they're deciding what that work is.
Yes. And there are several teammates here who have said, the reason I'm at Dean's Beans is because of what this company is about. If this were just a regular company, a commercial coffee company that was all about making money, selling coffee, and didn't have these other values and these other initiatives, I wouldn't be interested in working here. So I think I agree that there is a really important piece in that the work is meaningful. What we stand for, why we exist, our purpose is meaningful to people. And whether or not the people who live in Orange know of our purpose well, they see, what John described as, envisioning our role in our community. They can see how we are contributing, the ways that we contribute based on our values in the community. And then in the specialty coffee world, the organic fair trade coffee world, the company has been a leader and sort of a bellwether for many years in terms of putting values into action. And so that's what I'm hoping continues to happen as we grow in our decision-making processes and in our commitment. So I think we're starting off well, and it'll be exciting and interesting to see how it unfolds as we encounter the decision-making process.
I have a question for you, Julian. I notice that in all these years that we've been a co-op, there's been this gradual ascendance, but now it feels like a hockey stick. That the interest is so great these days, but you work in a much larger sphere than I do, and I wonder if you're experiencing that too, and having a sense that the awakening interest is just staggering.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it is the same. I hope it's as large of a trend as a hockey stick. I don't know if it's that large, but we certainly have seen a large increase in interest, particularly around conversions.
Yes.
There's so many different entities who see it as a viable solution to challenges. Particularly, you mentioned the silver tsunami, so many businesses at risk of being lost over the next decade. Saving those businesses, especially those that are thriving, is a real challenge, and worker cooperatives provide a real solution for it. I think the other side of it is, just looking at the statistics of what happens when business owners do generally retire. Those businesses, they will, in most cases, evaporate from the local ecosystem. I think there's a statistic that says 83% of business owners don't have a succession plan. So, I encourage everyone on the call who does own a business to heed John's advice to start thinking about succession planning now. It's never too early. And I think that's a lot of what is really driving the interest, and we do see it. I think some of the results of that interest are increased examples of policy popping up from different states and in different cities. There's more resources going to the supportive ecosystem of organizations who are helping worker cooperatives both start and transition. We've mentioned Cooperative Development Institute a few times on this call, and so that's a great example of that. And so, we are certainly seeing that, but also want to, put in a plug for everyone that there's not enough of it. We certainly need to have more people understand what worker ownership is, understand how to go about, embarking on the path towards worker ownership, and even get, more policy on the books as well.
I would add to that there's a cautionary tale piece of this story, that the silver tsunami is happening now. It's going to happen for the next decade or so. And a lot of business owners are assuming that they will be able to retire in one of two ways, that either they will be able to sell their business, or which only, and I learned this through Rob Brown at CDI, only 20% of businesses that are listed for sale actually sell. So if that's your exit strategy, you're going to have to think really carefully about how you package and position your company if selling it is the way you are anticipating being able to retire. And the other strategy that a lot of business owners have, and that Dean had for a period of time, was, I'm going to give this business to my children or my grandchildren. And that only happens about 15% of the time. So we say 100% of business owners are going to retire at some point, and only 20% will actually be able to sell their businesses, and 15% will actually be able to pass it on to the next generation. That's 65% of business owners who are going to be at risk of losing their business or just needing to close the doors at some point if they're not thinking proactively about succession planning and what their options are.
So I think that's a great transition for us to move to some of the questions in the Q&A box. And you can keep sending those questions. I've been collecting some. And so I think we could actually start off by going to this question of policy, start big picture. And we have a question from the audience that asks, are there roles for municipal government that may be doing community wealth building work to support employee ownership and transitions to employee or worker ownership? I wonder if, Julian, you want to speak to that?
Sure. That's a great question. Thank you so much for it. I think the short answer is yes. It also looks different from community to community. From a community wealth building standpoint, I think that Dowie in particular is working with a few municipalities across the country to support worker ownership at different levels. A few cities that come to mind for me are Chicago, which is a newer city, but they do have a pretty robust community wealth building approach. New York City has a different approach in the sense that they have a few $1 million that their city council commits to worker ownership on an annual basis to ensure that they are supported to start and transition. And then there's everything from cities who are interested in working with an organization like Dowie to start a specific business. It could be a pilot, it could be a solution in a specific industry that they're looking at. So I think that's there are many options, but the short answer is yes, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Julian. I also have some questions kind of comparing co-ops to ESOPs. And I know we've talked about ESOPs a little bit, and we've talked about the spectrum of different types of employee ownership. So there's a question, how would you compare worker co-ops with ESOPs?
I would tackle that one, Alice. ESOPs, as I mentioned, are the most widespread form of employee ownership. They're heavily regulated by the IRS, and that's part of the reason for their popularity, is that they provide great tax credits to exiting owners. As Julian alluded, there is nothing inherently democratic about an ESOP, nothing at all. And most of them are not. There are wonderful democratic ESOPs like King Arthur Flower. I mean, there are a host of them, but it's not baked into the DNA of the structure. And also, it's very expensive to do. It doesn't, and very expensive annual reporting. It doesn't tend to be economical for businesses that are less than 50 to 100 employees, 25 million in annual revenues. So there's a strata there where it belongs. And finally, there's kind of new ESOPs must have outside board members and an outside trustee who actually has a fiduciary responsibility based on money. So if an ESOP gets a very good offer to purchase, in some cases they have to take it, and that's what happened to New Belgium Brewery. So they're not nearly as well protected as a worker co-op, in which if you get a great offer to sell a worker co-op, all the owners have to agree that that's what they want to do. So there's greater protection there.
Great. So I have a whole bunch of questions about how co-ops work. But first, I want to just touch on one of the things Julian said, was that often you get asked what industries are suited for co-ops, and that there is no specific industries that are well suited for co-ops. They can exist in any industry. But I do have a specific question from our audience asking if there are any examples of worker-owned companies that employ tech workers, for example, developers or QA testers or product managers. Does anybody have tech example?
So in
Yes.
the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, which surrounds Bologna, there's the greatest concentration of worker co-ops in the world, and many of them are super high-tech companies that are making things that small companies wouldn't normally be able to make, like parts for Ferraris, but they do because of the association with other co-ops that are making other parts or parts of what they're making. So there's this incredible network effect. But if you were talking about tech workers like what everybody does these days, yes, there are co-ops in tech.
Yes, there are. There is one called Collab Co-op.
Oh, yeah.
And they are international. So they're an international IT firm, and they do consulting, and it's collab.coop is their website. So I can I put that in the chat, and then you guys can put it out for everybody.
Great. And I think that it's important to, it might seem very specific to share like specific examples of, but I think it's important to illustrate the variety of cooperatives that there are, and so that people can start imagining, in Italy and in the US and all over.
Collab, I was on a meeting with two people who are owners at Collab. One of them was in the UK and one of them was in the States. So they partner on projects and on business development across the world.
I would also add that I think co-ops apply to far larger companies than people think. And there are examples in the world of co-ops with thousands of employees, employee owners. So as Julian says, they kind of go across the spectrum of industries, but I also think they go up in scale as well.
Yes, this book just came out. It is published. Let me see if I can get you. It's published by Mondragon, the largest unionized co-op in the world. It's called Humanity at Work and Life. And the subtitle is Global Diffusion of the Mondragon Cooperative Ecosystem Experience. It was released at a book party in Queens a couple weeks ago. And it not only has like the operating and philosophical and functioning tenets of their systems, but examples of from co-ops that are part of that use their operating principles. So a great resource for people who are interested in learning more.
And I'd love to take what you just mentioned, John, how people often think that much larger companies aren't suited for cooperative ownership. And I think that's probably because they think that it's hard to make decisions in a big company if it's a co-op. So I wonder if any of you'd like to speak about that, because there was actually a specific question. How do employee-owned businesses make executive decisions in an efficient way? Can it be harder to make important decisions in a timely manner? And I think that's one of the biggest questions I hear all the time.
So I'm going to go right back to that distinction between policy and management. And so in general, co-ops have somewhat hierarchical management, often much flatter than usual, but there's leadership. There must be leadership. And so decisions that must be made quickly and that have to do with operations and that require great expertise, those get made, as in many other companies. The policy decisions, it does take a tremendous amount of work to educate people so that they are able to make good decisions for the company. And it takes great meeting facilitation. It takes great organization, but all of these things just make your business better.
Yeah. Beth, do you have any things like observations that you have taken away from your journey so far into worker ownership at Dean's Beans on those, like what are those skills or muscles that you're building as you become?
So yes, we're learning about this right now. And we recently had a full day training with our CDI friends and about this decision-making process, because it does look from the outside like a real conundrum. And I said before we did the transition, sort of jokingly, but not exactly jokingly, like if we are going to be making all of our decisions based on consensus, I'm out. And like we need to have a more efficient way of making decisions that hears all voices, and it doesn't make it mean that making decisions takes years or an inordinate amount of time. And so what John was describing is what we're in the process of learning. Like, what is a management decision? I'm the CEO, so I'm management. What is a management decision? What is a board decision? We have 15 worker owners. There are 5 staff members who are owners who are on our board, plus Dean, and we will get another outside board member eventually. And then there are owner decisions. And that part of, as it was explained to us, there is one way to decide, and this is sort of diving into the weeds, but this is where we are right now. What are the weeds that we're going to be dealing with here? And so what is the test for significance? Does whatever the matter is, does it affect the likely survival of the co-op? Does it affect the basic character of the co-op? Will it involve changing policy for hiring or terminating members? So if its significance rises to the level of answering yes to any of those questions, then that is a board decision. And the test for extensiveness is, does the matter affect a large number of co-op members? Does it commit a substantial portion of resources? Does it affect operations for a long period of time? That, if the answer to any of those questions is yes, then that's a matter that gets taken to all members. And if a matter doesn't affect the survival of the co-op, if it doesn't affect the basic character of the co-op, if it doesn't change policy for hiring and terminating, then it can be a management decision. And so that's a little dense. But we also realized in our conversation about this that there's also sometimes an element of time sensitivity. If it's a decision because a pandemic happens or something happens where something needs to be decided quickly, that could influence who's involved in the decision-making process. So I'm imagining that Julian or John might have more to say about that. But in terms of decision-makings, this is where we are in our learning right now. What do I get to decide? What does the board decide? What does the whole membership need to agree on to move forward?
Alice, is it possible for me to share my screen for just 30 seconds?
Sure, I think so.
It'll work?
I believe so.
Okay. Does everybody see that?
No, not yet. No, there we go.
Oh,
there
we go.
Okay.
Ooh, yay.
Don't try to read it. So that's just showing you, there it is at South Mountain. That's what the owners decide. That's what the board decide. That's what leadership decides. So it's codified.
Great.
Wow.
Thank you. I think
Awesome.
that's those tools of democracy that we might not have very much practice with in our workplace. So that's like a learning curve for cooperatives and for cooperative members to distinguish those things, because when we're used to ownership by one person in a small business, those things all get very mixed together. So that I know that from my work in helping companies transition to worker ownership, that's one of the things that's very hard to kind of sort out. It's very important to sort out, and that's what we do. But it's something that everybody's used to kind of mixing up in a small business.
Well, and Dean used to make all those decisions, all of the decisions.
Mhm.
And so now 15 of us are trying to make decisions together. And it's a different process for sure.
So we have a few more minutes, and I would love to take a little time right now. We have more questions, but we're not going to get to all of them. So I wonder if there's a way that we can direct people to the best resources for them to follow up to answer some of these questions that they have. Would each of you want to share a little bit about where you would recommend people look for for resources?
Well, I have a recommendation that if you go to the Abrams Angell website, www.abramsangell.com, there's a resource page, and some of the resources that Beth mentioned are on those pages and can be downloaded. But there's also a worker co-op conversion guide that we use, and actually, if you wait till next week, there's going to be a better version because it's getting updated, but you can get it now if you want. So that's and also I think everything that's on the South Mountain website is there, but that's a good place for some good co-op resources. And if while you're on that website, I talk about these subjects and share progress with my book project monthly in short essays. And if you go to the blog page, there's a place at the bottom to sign up if you'd like to and get more information about this.
Beth or Julian, do you have recommendations?
So I'm going to put two links in the chat. One is to Democracy at Work Institute's website. That's institute.coop. And the other is the website of our sister organization, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. On our site on institute.coop, we have a number of tools for startups and transitions. We've also got some examples and some case studies as well and some research. And then the usworker.coop website is really helpful because that's the national grassroots membership organization for worker co-ops. And so there's a directory there of co-ops if you're interested in finding them. There's also, if any of you are worker owners on the call, there should be a link on that website to complete our census to help us understand and count the number of co-ops who exist within the United States.
Thanks,
Cool.
Julian.
And we have gone to Dowie's website. We have gone to South Mountain's website, and John has been a really gracious and generous supporter, resource, and CDI, Cooperative Development Institute, and their team gave us lots of resources as well. So you could go to the Cooperative Development Institute, and there are some downloadable resources there.
Thank you. So I would love to open it up now for each of you to share some closing remarks, and then I'll share some final information and we'll be done. Who would like to start us off? Julian, would you like to go?
Yeah, you want to go in the same order? That makes sense.
Sure.
So, I mean, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful to share this space with you all. This has been incredibly inspiring. It's wonderful to hear and learn more about your stories. I'd known a bunch coming into this conversation, but it's really different hearing your specific take on really the intricacies of running your businesses over the years. And so I appreciate that. And, carrying forward, I'm thinking about some of the challenges that we talked about local economies facing, and I'm thinking about just the broader spectrum of ownership and how we continue to think about applying and being creative with ownership as we apply it towards some of the challenges that we're facing. And I'm thinking about yes, building equitable local economies. I'm also thinking about fighting climate change. And I encourage everyone to think about worker ownership, not as a standalone idea, but really as a tool within a broader toolbox, as we face collective challenges, but those are challenges that can also benefit from cooperative solutions. And so think about where worker ownership sits within that toolbox. It could include, or I think it probably overlaps a little bit with investing in small businesses. It's certainly overlaps with land stewardship, local investment, but also just really keeping local benefit and questioning who does this benefit, who do we exist for top of mind.
Thank you, Julian. John?
First of all, this has been great being with all of you. I think people are going to look back on these times that seem so bleak in so many ways and see that there was in this era a tremendous groundswell of activity to solve climate change, to solve climate injustice, to solve wealth inequality, but that history will recognize that a big part of it was changes in our economic system brought on by a tectonic shift from shareholder supremacy to stakeholder engagement among the workforce. And what can we do now? A ton. We all know small businesses. Some of us have them. We can talk to them and we can talk to ourselves about succession. And are you and are they thinking about the array of new opportunities and there's this growing tribe of consultants and developers and attorneys and accountants and financial advisors who actually are starting to understand and support these options. So this is a time for doing, and all of you can do your part in this. So thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
So I would say there's hope wherever you are on the continuum of participation in a company, whether you are an owner thinking about succession, whether you are an employee thinking about what the options are for your future, and you having an equity stake in being up to something big in the world through a company that's really based on values and social impact, or whether you're a policy person who researches and writes about what's happening and what sort of the leading edge of business options are in a world that clearly is coming to the end of an era where wealth supremacy and the owning class being the ruling class, that must come to an end, and the foundations of our understandings of economics and who contributes, who is the foundation, who is holding up the economic system that we currently have, and how can workers be people who benefit from the effort, their labor, and the profits of their labors. And, you know, as we move forward, all of us here hold this commitment, but invite you also to share it with us and to meet us out on the road of working toward a just and regenerative global economy in our own communities, in our own industries. And so I'm really grateful to be here today and to be part of this ongoing and just critically important conversation.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you all. Thank you all for being here and for being part of this conversation. Thanks for all of our audience members. It's been my pleasure to be just a facilitator here today. And I hope that we can all keep the conversation going.
Well,
John,
I would like to thank you, Alice. Thank you, Alice, and David in the background, and
Thanks,
Susan
David.
and everybody at the amazing Schumacher Center. Thanks a lot for doing this.
And hi, Mom. I see my mom's one of the participants.
Bye, Mom.
Bye, Mom.
As always, there are many resources on the Schumacher Center's website and a lot more to learn there. The Schumacher Center's website is centerforneweconomics.org. And we're going to have another conversation like this, another panel on Thursday, November 16th. And the theme will be expanding the frontiers of convening. So please join us for that and keep an eye out for more information about that coming up. Thank you all for being here and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Alice.
Bye, everybody.